Stephen King has written Stephen King has written 67 novels, over 200 short stories, and those stories have been turned into 80 movie adaptations. And in this series, we will be talking about every single one of them. But first, let's get somewhere less buggy. Shoot, wrong place. Okay, that's more like it. So to give some context for my history with Stephen King, the first book that I read from him about 3.5 to 4 years ago would be the book Insomnia, which is about a 7-year-old man who can't fall asleep and starts to see very strange things going around in his town called Derry, and it is very connected to the rest of the Stephen King universe, but I didn't know any of that at that time. I didn't know anything about Stephen King. I just wanted to read a book. And this, actually I got it, give me a second. This would be still, I think, the thickest Stephen King book that I've read. Let's see how many pages we got. 780 pages. So, yeah, I was reading this. This is still the best one that I've read, but I don't remember it well enough to honestly say, like, it was the best of best. If you know what I mean, I have to reread it. And I'm going to reread it in this series, where I have accumulated a lot of Stephen King books. And at first I was just reading through without any through line, anything connecting the books together. And so I decided just read what seemed cool and what I could get my hands on. And now that I've finished that, I kind of want to go chronological through his books. And then I want to go through the Dark Tower series, which is going to be about 18 to 20 books. But before I could do the Dark Tower series, or I could go through chronologically with his books, I did want to make this video just to sort of go through the books that I'd already read to get you guys caught up before we go on more grand adventures with Stephen King. 6 books and 2 short stories to go through here to talk about today. And I haven't finished all these yet. I'm reading this one and I'm reading this one, the short stories collection. But yeah, so let's just get started with what I started with, which is starting out, we have Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King, which came out in 1988. And to summarize it, a tale of atypical heroes and sweeping adventures of dragons, princes, and evil wizards. There's an epic fantasy as only Stephen King could envision it. A kingdom in turmoil after King Roland dies and his worthy successor, Prince Peter, is imprisoned by the evil Flag and his pawn, the young Prince Thomas. But Flag's evil plot is not perfect, for he knows the knot of Thomas's terrible secret, or Prince Peter's daring plan to escape to claim what is rightfully his. I didn't really know if I could get back into Stephen King. I'd read one book, I was like, it was really good, but I don't know if he's my kind of author. And this isn't the typical Stephen King book. This is fantasy. This is dragons and wizards and princes and towers and adventures. And the reason Stephen King made this movie was for his daughter, which was about 9 or 10 at the time, I think. And none of the books to which he had written, he thought he could read to his daughter. So it's like, I'll just write her this. And I think it's very sweet. It's a very different Stephen King book. It's the most different Stephen King book which I have read. And I honestly love it. I think the characters and story are very whimsical. They feel a little bit familiar, especially the prince and the king, because they're sort of like, you know, as we have had Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty and sort of other stereotypical royal families before. The story is really nice. I really enjoyed the little pieces here. And this world that he created where there was like a dragon head and that's mounted, and the boy can see through the eyes of the dragon head and see what his father's doing, and then he sees the conspiracy, and it's very easy to read. It's not anything harsh or jagged like much of Stephen King is. It's very just, let's go on a little adventure. Easily the best part of the book for me would be the antagonist, Randall Flagg, RF as he is known, and he shows up later in the Dark Tower multiverse, which is a whole nother thing, which I didn't really know about going into reading Stephen King. But this book heavily, ties into it with its characters and its villain in that series. So if we remember, we have this batch of books, and then we have chronological, and then we're gonna have somewhere in there, the multiverse. And so this ties into the multiverse, This and Insomnia, which we got right here, these two books. I'm not gonna reread this. I'm gonna probably get a refresher before I go into the multiverse. But Insomnia, gonna reread that one. Very intrigued to read the multiverse. That's what I'm looking forward to the most out of the Stephen King books, the Dark Tower series. But Eyes of the Dragon, I think it's great tier. I would definitely recommend it. Even if you don't think you're a Stephen King fan, just give it a shot. A lot of people don't like it as much as I do, which I've been a little surprised by, but it's not trying to be the greatest book of all time. It's just trying to be a little adventure, and I really like that, especially for Stephen King. Next we got Firestarter, one of the more classic Stephen King ones. Let me see, this came out in 1980, so a few years before Eyes of the Dragon. This one, little paperback, which I got. I don't know, I realized I like physical books, so that's why I got these right here. But this is, I think, the most classic Stephen King book that I have read up to this point, other than Carrie, which we're not really gonna address in this video. Firestarter is the tale of a girl named Charlie who has magical powers and could create fire, along with her telekinetic father, who they're both running from an agency known as, I don't remember the name of them. Let me see. This is bugging me, genuinely. The Shop. Okay. So, it's about Charlie and her father running away from an evil agency called The Shop, who is trying to catch them and do experiments on Charlie. And they hire mercenaries to get her. They have task force, military, agents, all trying to get her. And it's their sort of run, and it's very like chapter segmented. Like there's 3 distinct acts with like on the run, and then they get somewhere and they hang out there, and then something else happens and they're in a different location, and then you get the slam bang finale. Favorite thing in this book that Stephen King showed me that he could do, his characters. I loved his characters in this. Charlie is okay, but I really like her father in this, and I really like the Shop members. And there's a mercenary, Rainbird, who I think is one of the most fascinating antagonists which we have had. He's just a crazy person that I love seeing be a crazy person. It does have its slower portions, especially when I'm thinking of it compared to like Eyes of the Dragon. I'm like, Eyes of the Dragon was a bit more compact, but this fleshed things out a lot more. I liked her powers, I liked the backstory with her father, and I really liked just the characters in this. Not as much the world or the events or even the plot, just the characters and hearing their psyche and what they're thinking, because you do a lot of character shifts chapter to chapter, and that was very fun for me. So this is another Stephen King book where I was just like, oh, his popular stuff is good too, of course. And so I think this book goes on the great tier. I don't think I would recommend this one as much as the Eyes of the Dragon, but Firestarter, like, really had a good time with this book. And this is where we're gonna talk about something else with the Stephen King books, the movies that accompany them. I will read all the books, and then I will review each one of the movies. So Eyes of the Dragon didn't have a movie. I would have loved to see if they did one. They had plans to make one, but it never actually worked out. So for Firestarter, a lot more popular of a novel, and especially with Stephen King books, usually there's like 2 adaptations of his most popular ones. This happened with like The Shining, this happened with Firestarter, this happened with Carrie. There's actually 4 movies, 3 adaptations. We have 1984's Firestarter, starring a very young Drew Barrymore as Charlie, the main character. This movie I saw after the 2022 Firestarter, which I will not really be talking about. I don't remember it too much. 2022's Firestarter is starring Zac Efron, and that's about all you need to know. It's cheesy and bad and not good at all, and it goes on the bad tier, obviously. For me, I'm not really gonna go into it. I'm very tired of the story. It's worse than this 1984 version, but I did watch it. I'm not rewatching it for this. But the 1984 version, it has an actually really good cast, and it's a very 80s film. The way that the characters talk, the way the setting is done, the pacing, and especially some of the camera movements and cheesy effects are so 80s. And that had more charm to it than the 2022 version, especially when we get so many lackluster horror movies. I think the 80s charm had me a bit more than the fumbling thing that the 2022 version had, where I couldn't even stand that one. But the 1984 version, I like the performances, I like segments, and I noticed it did trim down, especially some of the pieces from the book. There's a character in the book that goes crazy, wears his, because of contact with Charlie's father, he goes crazy, wears his wife's underwear, and then destroys his hand in like the kitchen sink. That was not in either one of these movies. They decided not to do that. For what it is, I think the 84 version still feels lackluster. I don't think there's ever gonna be a good adaptation of Firestarter unless you get like a really good director, and who's gonna wanna do it at this point? I think the best version is the book, and especially considering like how cheesy the effects look and how doing telekinetic energies and whatnot doesn't come off as good, especially in film. The way they executed all of it came off very cheesy rather than serious. And it is a kind of cheesy book, and it acknowledges that at certain points. It needed a bit more oomph to it. The mercenary, my favorite character, Rainbird, he looks like you would want the character to look, but his psyche is way off. It was a pretty frustrating movie to watch. This one's going on the Met tier, and Firestarter book easily beats the movie here. I don't know if the movie's gonna beat any of the books on this list through this entire series, but books usually beat the movies. Next up, we have Misery from 1987. I really like this cover here. Pretty cool. But essentially it tells the tale of an author who wrote the final book in a series, and a snowstorm occurs, he was drinking, and he's taken by Annie Wilkes, who is a mega fan of his, who takes him and essentially forces him to write a revised version of his final book with the main character. This one, once again, showed me Stephen King, when working at full capacity, can make some really cool stuff. This is one of his most classics, and it has none of the sci-fi fantastical, no monster, nothing under the bed, no vampires, ghouls, clowns in one location primarily. And the psyche of both characters. Well, actually, just the main character, Paul Sheldon, who I really thought was a pretty cool character. He's decent. He's a good POV character for Annie Wilkes, who is the standout in this one and is all over everything and is the main thing that people think of when they think of this movie. And I absolutely just had a blast. I was reading in the winter, and so that snowy upstate, like I think it's set in Massachusetts or New Hampshire, something atmosphere, just sort of building you and bringing you in and telling you, hey, this thing's happening. And then the snow eventually melts and just, I don't know. The atmosphere of this book is like none other, and this is when I realized like they had references to The Shining in this of all books, and I was like, wow, okay. So you get the sort of contrast of in a Stephen King universe, in a little town, in a little house with two characters, and especially the sort of horror as it slowly unfolds. I really had a blast reading this, even though it's slow paced, it's pretty even. And I think it's a great Stephen King book. It's one of his better ones. Great tier for me. Really, really good time with this book. Couldn't put it down. But yeah. And if we're talking about Rob Reiner's 1990 version of Misery, I feel like that it had a more consistent pace than the original Misery. It had a very good tempo, just like this thing happens and this thing happens and this thing happens, and it goes on, and it's very smooth. But I found it a little bit more boring, and it had a bit less of that carnage than the book had, especially with some of the nightmare sequences. Kathy Bates, who plays Annie Wilkes, easily her best performance, and it had me feeling very gross for the entire movie, and I liked that. In a weird way, in a different way from the book too. I don't know, the book felt more like ingrained in me, and the movie felt a bit more conventional. But I think the movie's still a good movie, undeniably. I didn't like it as much as a lot of other people, and I felt like there could have been a bit more of the fantastical elements with like the nightmare sequences, and then especially there's one sequence where she's attacking him and she uses a sledgehammer instead of an axe. Both work, but for me, I don't know, I wanted a bit more of that oomph to it. But I think Misery 1990 easily could go on the good tier. It's a good movie for me. It's on the edge of the great tier, but it isn't all that for me. Really cool poster, by the way. Like, look at this. This thing is gorgeous. This is a beautiful poster. One of my favorites from Stephen King. Like, all of his book covers and movies, just chef's kiss.
Baseball, huh? That tracks.
Oh, next we have The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. I don't have a cover or anything for this. This came out in the 99, Stephen King. This is the tale of a girl who wanders into the woods after her mother and her were going on some sort of hike, and she went off into the woods to pee and then tries to go back to her mom and gets lost in the woods. It's very psychological and looking at the girl's sort of what she's thinking. We only cut away from the girl lost in the woods a few times. Unfortunately, this is going to be the first Stephen King book that I did not care for. This one isn't very popular. I can understand why. And it's very repetitive with there's in woods, hallucination, listens to baseball game, dreams, wanders through woods, hallucination, listens to baseball game, dreams, and then we'll have a random cutaway. I think the best part of this entire book was when we cut back to her parents who were divorced and seeing their sort of dynamics of what's going on. I'm gonna spoil the ending just because I don't suggest this book, but in the end, there's sort of revealed this like mysterious persona that's like, is it real? Is it fake? And I'm pretty sure it was real. That sort of runs the girl out of the woods to safety. And it's like, was it helping her the whole time? Was it like evil? And it's like, what is going on? I didn't care about any of that. The only thing that I cared about was when we go back to the divorced parents and they're sort of like getting back together and like trauma bonding over their daughter being lost, even though like one of them is married, I'm pretty sure. There's no movie for this yet, but J.T. Moynihan, maybe. The guy who wrote and directed Strange Darling a few years ago and wrote the screenplay for A Long Walk, which is part of the reason that I got triggered to do this whole Stephen King assance. Apparently gonna set to direct a version of this, and I feel like he could take this source material and do something crazy with it, and I'm very intrigued to see that, even though this is going in the bad tier for me, and I'm very much anticipating checking out that movie when it eventually does come out.
Sign here.
When that quake hit, I'll tell you, it was scary.
Here. Use my back, victim.
And it almost woke the wife up.
Next we have The Running Man, which was it's part of Stephen King's thing with The Long Walk, Rage, Blaze, and there's another one, Roadwork, where he wrote them as Richard Bachman, which I found very fascinating. But this one essentially follows Ben Richards, who he has no job, no income, he gets fired, and he goes into this contest called The Running Man, where if you could survive a month, then you could win a sum of money and he could get his family out of debt and his daughter's like dying or something. This book, let me just show you how it starts. You go minus 100 and counting, and then it just goes down, and it could be really, really, some of them are really small. Let me see if I can find one. Minus 36 and count, like, they're really just these little sections, and there's 100 of them. And that's how it's set up. And so it keeps you going. You're like, okay, I only got 50 left. I only got 20 left. And this is the fastest that I've read a Stephen King book, even more than some of his short stories and whatnot. This one, I wanted to finish first off because the Edgar Wright Running Man was coming out, and I really just, it grabbed me, the concept, and then also it's not horror, but it's very sci-fi and this other, like, I wouldn't say Blade Runner, but that kind of thing, that kind of territory of film. It really hit. I really enjoyed it. I love the main character. I love all the random stuff that he goes through. All the sort of every segment that we go through in the movie in the story is very interesting and had me hooked. How he's gonna get it out of it, how he's gonna get moving on to the next thing, how it's gonna wrap up. And then at the end of the day, the bleak atmosphere which this film encapsulates, and it just drenches you in this just like, oh, so that's how it ends. And it's same thing, like mismatching Misery, Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, and Running Man, and just Misery and Running Man just like really just pushing that, and it's always gonna haunt you. And the final chapter in this book had me just like hollering. It was amazing. Love this book. This one just like Eyes of the Dragon. I know this one's a popular one, but even this just, ooh, it hits. And I really, really enjoyed The Running Man. If we're gonna talk about the movies, you had the Schwarzenegger version, which I watched before watching the Edgar Wright, Glenn Powell version, which came out in the 80s. And it has a lot of 80s cheese in it. I had a lot of fun watching it, and it's very unfaithful to the source material, probably the most unfaithful King adaptation that I've seen yet, where it has a loose concept of the book, and that's all it does. It is the Running Man only in name, not really in story. And so I had a lot of fun just because of Arnold. There's a scene where he just says,
"Here is Sub-Zero. Now, Plane Zero."
So funny. Watching him in this movie is hilarious. Some of the side characters are pretty cool and kooky, but this wasn't anything crazy. It was like, it was fine. I had fun, but I realized as a story, there's nothing here. It's just 80s cheese encapsulated in a little film. And even for an Arnold movie, there's better Arnold movies out there. And I can understand, I didn't even know this existed until I was doing my research. And so I could understand why the film doesn't hit like that, but it gets the energy, the vibe right. Moving on to The Running Man 2025. I liked some of it. It gets better as it goes along. The opening 10 minutes were genuinely bad, but the performances are good. Josh Brolin, Coleman Domingo, Glenn Powell, they were all good. Michael Cera was a standout. He was easily the best section of the movie. That's when it hit its peak. It felt like, once again, we're doing the Cliff Notes, but we're doing an action-adventure version of a mature story with the book. And it didn't fit exactly right. And a lot of people had critiqued it because they were saying Edgar Wright didn't feel like Edgar Wright, and I could agree with that. And so, I don't know, it felt like a Ready Player One version of The Hitman meshed together, and then Edgar Wright didn't even know he directed this. You couldn't tell. And a little disappointing, if I'm being honest. But once again, I'd say they're both like okay tier movies for very, very different reasons. I get my enjoyment out of both, but neither one of them are like got the punch that I wanted them to. They just have cool segments here and there that I'm like, passable, fun entertainment, but very much even on like, they're just a little bit higher of the okay tier, nothing crazy. Both sort of encapsulate like 80s had the big bombastic effects and the colors and the Arnold and movie stars, and we still have that in the 2020s. But looking at sort of like the way they encapsulate the sort of decades they were made in, the 2020s version is very much like an action adventure with our heroes, and it's got like some comedy, and it's got like Michael Cera, and it's got this and that, and it doesn't fit the book, and neither does the 80s version, because I feel like the book is something just beyond either one of those. I don't know, they're both something interesting at least. But I'm not gonna throw this one. This is for and it includes The Langoliers, Secret Window, Secret Garden, The Library Policeman, and The Sundog. I've gone through the first two when I watched the movies. First one we're going to talk about in here is it's about a flight of people that are going on a plane, and we follow the first POV, which we follow is the pilot. And I'm actually going to put this down. And they're going on a plane, and all of a sudden, everybody that was sleeping wakes up, and they're in like a different dimension or something, they think. And everybody's gone on the plane that was awake, and the pilot's gone. Our pilot that was sleeping is awake, who was divorced, and then, I don't know, Stephen King talks about like falling asleep and seeing something outside a window, and that was his inspiration for this. And I don't know, it has a very eerie nature to it. It isn't, nothing like outright terrifying happens, but these little eerie moments throughout the story really sort of build the suspense throughout. And it has a good sense of comedy. This one has like the most characters in a Stephen King book as far as I've read, other than like Eyes of the Dragon, I would say. And we're switching POVs, and I thought all the characters had their nuances and were pretty interesting. So just going through each segment much like with the Running Man, where you got each action sequence, every little we go to a place and then we need to figure out what's going on, and the discussions of like what is reality and all that. And then especially in the third act, I really liked how they wrapped it up. Although it was weird and I did not see it coming at all, I enjoyed it. It gets this multiple POVs with the characters so that you could go with like the young person, then you could go with like the scientifical mind person, then you could go with just the girl who doesn't really care about any of this, and then you could go with the teacher, and then you could go with our main guy, the pilot. And just swapping all of it, it kept the variety going, and it had me, I stopped like halfway through and then I went back in and I'm like, okay, I'm genuinely enjoying this. And so The Langoliers or The Langoliers, a very enjoyable book. I would put it great tier. As for a short story, it was like the perfect start. Hit it off with a bang at 4 past midnight. And I was like, okay, let's see what else you got, Stephen King. This was a really good concept. Speaking towards the movie though, The Langoliers or The Langoliers, it was sort of like a direct-to-TV movie, so it didn't have the budget. It had decent budget, but it didn't have the budget to sort of craft this story the way I wanted to. It was like free on YouTube. As much as the Stephen King databank is just on YouTube for free, I felt like the characters didn't pop enough. It was like a 50-50. I felt like the nerd character worked and the guy that goes crazy to me worked in this movie, but the rest of the characters, it's like, I don't really care about you as much. And it sort of does build a suspense, and since you've already read the book and you know what's going on, you know what's gonna happen. So I was kind of just like passively watching it because I'm like, okay, now this is gonna happen and then this is gonna happen. And then that happened. And so I'm thinking maybe there should be a little time in between me reading the book and then watching the movie, because I did it back to back and it was a little weird. Especially with the third act, I think they handle it well, but just seeing it visualized, all of this, it didn't really make as much sense. And when you're in a book especially, you could do an entire chapter on explaining the lore of whatever you want, and you could explain in detail what something is like and how it feels and how it looks and how it sounds. In a movie, you just had the visual and audio. And since this was lower budget, I don't even know how much they made this for. It was not that much. I don't think they had the resources to pull it all together. And I don't think I really need a movie adaptation of this or a TV show adaptation. I think it was a mini series. It's almost 3 hours long, but it worked as a book, as a short story, as a concept. And I really liked it as that, and I don't need it as anything else. So the movie, man, I think that could go on the meh tier. It didn't do anything to impress me, and I really wanted it to. Okay, next one on here, the last short story and last thing that we will be talking about in the Stephen King universe, which I read, is Secret Window, Secret Garden. Yep, Secret Window, Secret Garden. And it's about this author who is writing a book, and he's a celebrated author, much like in Misery, and he's kind of stuck and he's done writing books. He wants to write another book, but he can't, and so he's kind of like in this in-between of what should I do? And so this one character shows up to his house and is like, you stole my story. And he has to prove to this man that he didn't steal his story and sort of come to terms with like, what have I done? And like, did I? And like, am I remembering wrong? And once again, like the Langoliers, it's like another mystery where you have to figure out what's going on. Who can we trust in this? I didn't really care for this book as much. It took a while for me to get through it. And I didn't get much entertainment value, and the mystery wasn't intriguing. It's like, okay, he's got to find the story. So he's gonna call his publicist, and then his publicist is gonna call somebody else, and then they tell him, hey, I can get your story in these many days. And then he's like, oh wait, that's gonna be pretty close. Will I get the story? And then the other character's like, okay, I'm gonna burn your house, and he burns his house. Oh no. And I thought it was kind of boring, and it didn't have much meat, much punch to every action, because you're just following this one character. You're not swapping POVs at all. You're just one character, and he's nowhere near as interesting as the characters from Misery. And so I don't know, I'm gonna spoil the ending for this one as well, because I would not recommend Secret Window, Secret Garden. But essentially it's Fight Club, where the character that he's talking to is just himself, and it takes a while to figure it out. And I've seen Fight Club, I've read Misery, I've watched Misery. All of these elements are better than all of them put together. I found myself at the end and I'm just like, what was that? What were we doing? I understand Stephen King, Fight Club before Fight Club. Okay, cool, but it didn't pop. It didn't hit. It was kind of corny. It was kind of cheesy. And yeah, this is where I'm like, okay, let's take a break with the short stories. I started The Library Policeman and I was like, no, not now. I'm not doing that. And so 4 Past Midnight, the short story collection, we're saving that for a minute. We're putting that on the back burner. We'll let that cook in the background. We'll slowly get through like the stories in the other 2, but we're being chill. I think this could go on the bad tier. Well, the meh tier. It's not as bad as Tom Gordon for me, but it didn't do anything to impress me, I would say. Tom Gordon and Secret Window, Secret Garden are the only 2 misses that we've had so far, and they're both pretty short, so it's not the end of the world. They're both like under 250 pages. There is a movie adaptation, as I said, with Johnny Depp, and I really couldn't care more for the story. It's the same story, it's the same beats, nothing is added really. The only part that I found interesting in this movie is they have a scene where Johnny Depp is talking to Johnny Depp, and it's awesome. And he's just talking to himself and ruminating, and I really enjoyed that. And it's like 5 to 10 minutes of the movie, and it's in like the 75, well, the 3rd act. That was cool. Everything else, copy paste what I said about the book. I think the Johnny Depp performance is good, and I think the performance from the guy that's like Johnny Depp, but you don't know that he's Johnny Depp, Severance guy, that was pretty good, but that's it. Like, what am I supposed to do? Say the same stuff? It's the same thing, just done like, I think it came out like a decade later after the book was released. Johnny Depp is one of the most talented, a very talented actor, and seeing him do this, kind of a miss if I'm being honest. So this one, another meh tier, nothing crazy. I didn't have my mind blown, but it was more entertaining to see Johnny Depp do something than to read a random character that I don't care about doing something, if that makes sense. Final thing before I go. This is the current setup. I've already read Carrie, so I'll talk about that in the next video as we sort of go through the original Stephen King book stuff. I don't know how many months it'll take me to do that. And then I also am starting Rage, and I want to talk about The Long Walk and Roadwork, all written by him as Richard Bachman. And we are gonna let 4 Past Midnight, we'll let it on the back burner. I don't know if you'll ever hear my thoughts about The Library Policeman, but it's sitting there and it's in my mind. But we got more stuff cooking. I'm still watching movies. I'm still reading books. I'm still thinking about all this. So I think that's about it. Tell me if you like this format. It's something different for me. I've never done anything like this before. So if you read any Stephen King, or watched any Stephen King, leave it down below. I'll try to figure it out, go through it. Hopefully this could be a fun series. I don't know how much editing this is gonna take, but thank you for watching. Appreciate it. See you in the next one, I guess.